Good morning, everybody. So you just heard a lot about UMass and UMass's policy and the success that it has had out here. And I'm going to take a step back and just talk about policy generally. And I am not actually going to talk specifically about the regulations in that way. So if you have any questions afterwards, I would be happy to talk to you about that. But I'm just going to talk about why policy is important in the context of farm to institution. So this is my only slide, so you have to stare at it for a while and listen to me, not the slide. So briefly, a little bit about the Food Law and Policy Clinic at Harvard Law School. So about 3 years ago, we started a clinic, and the mission of the Food Law and Policy Clinic is to increase access to healthy foods, prevent diet-related diseases such as type 2 diabetes and obesity, and then assist small-scale and sustainable farmers in participating in local markets. And so a clinic is kind of a confusing word to use in a law school or a legal setting. And what it means is that we have students that come work with us and they get credit for putting into practice what it is that they are learning in school. So it's a hands-on time so we can craft little lawyers and then let them out into the world and hopefully to do good work. So we have been working on 2 projects around farm to institution in Massachusetts over the last 2 years. In the fall, we did a project on farm to institution, farm to state colleges and universities, and that report is on our website, so you can download it and read it if you'd like. And then we have this spring been working on a project about local procurement by state agencies, and so those are 2 different entities that are purchasing local products. And the reason we've been looking at local procurement by state colleges and universities and now by state agencies is because there happens to be a law in Massachusetts that deals with local procurement. So has anybody heard of this Section 23B? Yes. Okay, so some of you are familiar. In Massachusetts, there is a law that requires state agencies to purchase Massachusetts-grown food if it's not more than 10% more expensive than out-of-state products. And then it encourages state colleges and universities to do the same, but doesn't require it. So there's this policy backdrop in the state that institutions in Massachusetts should buy local produce. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on Section 23B, but just keep it in the back of your mind as we move through the rest of the day. So as Andrew mentioned earlier, there's a lot of talk about the importance of tying food access to supporting local food systems. And farm to institution policies and programs are a really good way of bridging that gap. So farm to institution is important for consumers because it does increase consumers' access to healthy foods. So if you have an institution that is purchasing local products and they consume that food, then they are thereby having more opportunities to eat local healthy food. Farm to institution is also really good for farmers because, as we were talking about before, direct sales at farmers markets are great, but it's not always the most secure way of making a livelihood. But if you have institutions that are purchasing local produce, it's a more secure market. Farmers are able to grow their operation because they have a demand that they can meet. And third, farm to institution is important because it allows institutions to engage in education and conversation around the importance of healthy food and about supporting local food systems. So if you didn't already have enough reasons to support farm to institution, there are 3 more that connect food access and supporting local food systems. So I am a lawyer, which means that we like policy. We like to talk about policy and think about policy. And so I was asked to talk about why policy is important in farm to institution. First, there are 2 major categories of policy that we think about. There's the government policy, which is what Section 23B is. The state says this is what we're going to do. But then there are also policies that can be implemented by non-government institutions, so hospitals and schools and prisons and those other types of institutions that can be separate from a government policy. And so I'm going to focus on the importance of institutions themselves having their own policies. One reason why farm-to-institution policies are important is because it is a statement of support for local agriculture. So it puts the issue of local food systems and food access on people's radar, because sometimes people have no idea that supporting local food systems is even an issue. We all know that, but people outside of this group may not. So having an institution that says we support local produce or local agriculture in this way is really important. Secondly, having a policy on purchasing local food has more staying power than just relying on a program. So a policy is a commitment by an institution to certain behavior and certain actions, and then you figure out in the long run how to maintain that policy. A third reason why farm-to-institution is important is because it shows that there is increased demand for local produce. Think if all of the institutions in your area said, we have a policy of buying local produce during the summer months or all year, then farmers would say, wow, all these people want local produce. Maybe I should grow my operation so that I can meet that demand. And my fourth, I had listed 5, but I think really I have 4.5 policy reasons. So the fourth and a little is that when an institution creates its own policy rather than trying to meet maybe the government's policy, or the institution decides we want to have this policy, the people who are going to implement the policy are the ones that are actually making it, right? So as the people who are designing the policy in the institution, you can say, here's what we want to do, and you can tailor it to your specific institution, and you can set benchmarks that are able to be met and monitored in the way that is appropriate for your own institution, rather than trying to fit somebody else's model. And then that means that you can actually measure the success and hopefully have a policy that is successful because you have crafted it to your own needs. And so we've heard that UMass Amherst has this really great policy, and they have been very successful. But as we all know, and we've talked about Congress, and we've talked about all our lawmakers, sometimes policies are not as successful as we hope that they would be. And so in our research for our state colleges and universities report, and now the state agencies report, we've identified a number of barriers and challenges that institutions have had in purchasing local produce. And one of the main problems is that people don't know about the law, or they don't know about the policy more broadly. And so one thing that institutions, that you all can do, this is our next steps and call to arms for increasing policies around farm to institution, is that increasing awareness about the policies that exist, or if you start a new policy, increasing awareness about that is really important. So if you can educate the farmers about the policy, educate the people who are buying the food, connect the farmers with the institutional purchasers. We've talked about this Match.com idea, and that's really true, and something that this group as a network can certainly do, is to find who's selling and who's buying and connect them together. Another barrier that we have heard about already today is some of the increased requirements to selling to institutions, such as the GAP, so the Good Agricultural Practices, or the Commonwealth Quality Certification. And so one thing that advocates can do to help support policies around farm to institution is to facilitate training, to provide funding, to host a training so that the barriers are reduced around this and will help make the policy more successful. Another barrier that people have identified are just the logistical issues. And so we've, again, heard about this already, but if you have one farmer who's trying to sell to UMass Amherst, the demand is pretty high, and the farmer by themselves might not be able to meet that demand. So working with an aggregator or facilitating the development of more aggregators in the area is a way to make a farm to institution policy more successful, because you are helping meet the demand. And lastly, the last barrier I want to mention is the difficulty of measuring success of your policy. So we all know that change is really hard, and if you're adding a new policy, there's going to be some time that it takes to see if your policy is successful. And so what you want to do is make sure that when you institute your policy, that you have a way of measuring the success. So you can say, here's what we've done, and let's keep building on this momentum. And so you can ask the food companies, the food service management companies, to track their local produce purchases. And they may say that they can't do it, but I think that they probably can. You just have to push them a little bit and say, sure you can, everybody can do that. And once you have the information about tracking the local purchases, then you can see if you're accomplishing your goal, and then maybe change your policy if you want to set a higher goal in the future. So those are my 4 reasons or opportunities for increasing policies around farm to institution. And I did want to mention, I think my time is pretty much up, but I did want to mention along the lines of regulations and laws and these kinds of big, scary things that are coming down. One thing to keep on your radar is that a couple years ago, Congress passed this Food Safety Modernization Act. Can I see a show of hands of people who know about it? So mostly everybody. But for those of you who don't know, Congress passed the Food Safety Modernization Act, which significantly overhauled the nation's food safety laws. And Congress, now FDA, is passing regulations, proposed regulations around that. And a couple just came out in January that are pretty significant for on-farm production and then processing. And it's a pretty complicated topic, and I have negative time now. So if you want to talk more about what this means for farm to institution purchasing for the farmers and then the institutions that are doing the purchasing, I would be happy to talk to you about this afterwards. Also, Mary Dale DeBoer is supposed to be here, but
she's just not here yet.
She's not here yet. Okay, well, when she shows up, she also has been working on this topic and would be happy to talk to any of you about it. So, thank you.
We're expecting later this summer to do an information session on the Food Safety and Modernization Act for farmers at CISA, so you can watch our website too if you're interested in learning more about it through that route as well as these other valuable channels.